It's a very strange experience to stand in front of your bathroom mirror in the morning.
Oh, for sure.
Like, you look at your reflection, you brush your teeth, you check your hair, and everything just seems perfectly still. It feels really calm.
Yeah, totally peaceful.
Right. But the reality is, right at that very moment, you are the active battlefield for an invisible, high-stakes sci-fi war. You just can't see it.
I mean, we experience our bodies as these single unified entities, but from a microscopic perspective, you are a sprawling landscape. You are an entire ecosystem. And honestly, you are constantly under siege.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking a stack of sources, specifically the life science standards for disease agents and global outbreaks, and we're turning it into the ultimate know your enemy survival playbook for human health.
Yeah, we're really going to uncover exactly how these tiny, sometimes entirely non-living agents affect our bodies and how those microscopic invisible battles can scale up to, well, global civilization-altering events.
Exactly. To really understand public health on a massive scale, like how a pandemic sweeps across the globe, you first have to understand the microscopic mechanics of the invasion. You have to know how the individual cellular battles are fought and won or, lost.
Right.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because this isn't just some abstract biology concept. It is literally about survival. Before we can understand how a global outbreak happens, we have to identify the culprits on a microscopic level.
Because we tend to lump all our biological enemies together as germs.
Exactly, just germs.
Right.
But looking at the biological landscape, they are entirely different beasts. We're looking at a microscopic lineup of four main suspects here: viruses, bacteria, fungi, and parasites.
And they operate with completely different rules of engagement. Let's start with viruses, because they fundamentally challenge our whole definition of life itself.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. The baseline biological rule is that all living things are made up of cells. The cell is the smallest unit that can actually be said to be alive. A living cell needs energy, it metabolizes nutrients, it creates waste, it reproduces. Viruses do absolutely none of that.
Right. They are biologically defined as non-living particles. They are essentially just a string of nucleic acids, so either DNA or RNA, wrapped up in a microscopic protein coat.
That is pretty much it.
Yeah, no cellular machinery, no metabolism. They are pure malicious hijackers. So I guess my question is, if they aren't alive, how are they doing so much damage?
Well, by using your own body's machinery against you,
Hmm.
because they lack their own engines, they absolutely need a host cell to reproduce.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, a virus basically drifts through your system until it bumps into a healthy cell. It breaches the outer membrane, slips inside, and literally commandeers the enzymes and organelles of your own cell. It forces your cellular factory to stop doing its normal job and start printing thousands of copies of the virus. Eventually, the cell is just so stuffed with new viruses that it bursts open, dying in the process and releasing the new hijackers to find new cells.
I have to push back a little on this whole non-living label, though.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's just so hard to wrap your head around something that isn't alive, yet actively invades. Are viruses essentially like malicious computer code on a flash drive?
Hmm, that's an interesting way to look at it.
Because think about it, a flash drive isn't alive. It doesn't use energy, it can't move on its own, it can't reproduce sitting on a desk. But the second it plugs into a host, like your computer, it hijacks the system's operating power to copy itself, send itself to your contacts, and crash your hard drive.
What's fascinating here is how perfectly that analogy captures their mechanical efficiency.
Mhm.
They don't have intent, they don't have a conscious drive to survive because they aren't alive in the first place.
Right, no brain, no thought process.
Exactly. They are purely a set of chemical instructions triggered by physical interaction with a host cell. That mechanical reality is exactly why they are the cause of some of our most widespread illnesses, from the common cold to COVID-19, and it's why they are so incredibly difficult to deal with medically.
That lack of internal machinery is like the perfect contrast to the second suspect in our lineup, which is
Man,
bacteria.
huge contrast, yeah.
Unlike a viral flash drive, bacteria are actually living organisms. They are unicellular, meaning the entire organism consists of just one single cell, but they meet that baseline definition of life.
They do. They metabolize, they need resources, and man, they are incredibly rugged survivors. They can thrive in a variety of extreme places, with or without oxygen, in boiling heat or freezing cold.
And their method of spreading inside you relies entirely on their own biology, not yours. A virus has to hijack your cells to replicate, but bacteria, they're self-sufficient.
Right, they reproduce through a process called binary fission. A single bacterium copies its genetic material, elongates, and basically just pinches right down the middle, splitting into two identical living cells.
And the sheer speed of this process is what makes it so terrifying.
Oh, absolutely.
Hmm.
Under optimal conditions, they double their populations rapidly. One becomes two, two become four, four become eight, and within hours you have millions.
Yes.
Instead of hijacking your cells from the inside, they are multiplying in your bloodstream or your tissues, viciously competing with your own cells for resources. And they often release harsh chemical toxins as a byproduct. That's the mechanism behind a bacterial disease like tetanus or strep throat.
Okay, so moving further up the complexity scale, we hit fungi. Fungi are generally multicellular, though a few, like yeast, are single-celled. But what makes fungi unique as invaders is that they are heterotrophic.
Yes, heterotrophic.
Wait, I remember learning that plants are autotrophs because they make their own food from sunlight, and animals eat plants or other animals. What do fungi do?
They essentially eat their environment by dissolving it.
Dissolving it.
Yeah, since they can't make their own food, they excrete powerful enzymes outside their bodies to break down organic matter, and then they absorb the resulting nutrients.
Oh, that's kind of gross.
It is a little gross.
Yeah.
When a fungus attacks a living host, those enzymes are literally digesting the host's tissues. Furthermore, they reproduce by releasing microscopic spores into the air.
Right.
When you inhale those spores or they land on a vulnerable piece of tissue, they take root and start the dissolving process all over again, causing anything from minor allergies to severe respiratory diseases.
Which brings us to the final category, parasites. And looking at the biology, this one feels a bit different. Is a parasite a specific animal or a plant?
Well, parasitism is not a taxonomic category at all. It's a behavioral strategy. You can have parasitic fungi, parasitic insects, or parasitic worms.
Okay.
A parasite is simply an organism that has evolved to exploit another living individual, known as the host, for survival.
So they basically bypass the hard work of finding food in the wild by moving directly to the source. A tapeworm is the classic nightmare scenario here.
The absolute classic, yeah.
It literally takes up residence inside the intestines of a human or animal, dropping anchor and siphoning off the nutrients the host has already gone to the trouble of digesting.
Before we move on to how the body actually fights back against these four very different invaders, there is a crucial misconception we need to clear up for you.
Right, because looking at this list, it sounds like a rogues gallery where every single microbe on Earth is out to get you.
Exactly. But the biological reality is that only certain species within these categories actually cause disease.
Yeah, your body is actually home to trillions of beneficial microbes.
Right.
We are walking ecosystems ourselves. You rely on massive populations of good bacteria in your gut to digest your food, synthesize vital nutrients, and even crowd out the dangerous disease-causing agents.
The beneficial microbes are fiercely territorial too. If a harmful bacterium tries to set up camp in your system, your native bacteria will often starve it out simply because they don't want the competition.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because these four agents have completely different biological structures and methods of attack, our bodies and our medical interventions must use entirely different strategies to fight back.
They have to.
The tactics that work against a living bacterium multiplying in your blood are totally useless against a non-living viral flash drive hiding inside your own cells. So how does our internal military actually operate?
Your primary defense system is the immune system, and its foot soldiers are the white blood cells. When an invader enters the body, white blood cells act in a couple of ways. Some of them are the brute force infantry. They physically engulf the invaders, swallowing the bacteria or fungal spores whole and just digesting them.
But other white blood cells act more like targeted assassins, right? They produce antibodies, which are highly specific proteins designed to recognize infectious agents. They lock onto the invaders directly, either neutralizing them or marking them so the engulfing cells know exactly what to destroy.
And the most remarkable part of this system is its memory. Once your immune system produces an antibody to fight a specific invader, a portion of those antibodies remain in your bloodstream long after the infection is gone.
Wow, really?
Yeah, if that exact same agent ever tries to invade again, the antibodies are already trained and waiting. The response is so fast you usually don't even get sick. That is how you build natural immunity.
Wait, hold on a second. You just said viruses aren't alive. They don't have intent or behavior. How does my body remember something that's essentially inanimate debris? Does my immune system have like a mugshot wall of these tiny protein coats?
That's a great question. It's less of a mugshot wall and more of a massive keychain. Antibodies operate entirely on chemical shape.
Chemical shape, okay.
The surface of a virus, even though it's not alive, has a very specific geometric protein structure. Your immune system generates an antibody that is the exact physical mirror image of that structure. It's a chemical key perfectly shaped to fit into the viral lock.
Oh, that makes sense.
Your body remembers the virus by keeping millions of those specific keys floating in your bloodstream. The next time that same physical shape enters the body, the keys immediately lock onto it, jamming in the mechanism so the virus can't plug into your healthy cells.
That lock and key memory is exactly how human science learned to hack the system with vaccines. A vaccine induces the body to build immunity to a disease without actually causing the illness.
Right, it's a practice run.
We basically hand the immune system a deactivated virus or just a harmless blueprint of its protein shape and say, hey, practice making keys for this. So when the real dangerous agent shows up later, your internal armory is already fully stocked.
That handles prevention perfectly. But what about treatment when an infection is already raging? This is where the profound biological differences between a bacterium and a virus become a matter of life and death.
Literally.
If your immune system is overwhelmed by a bacterial infection, we intervene with antibiotics. Because bacteria are living cells with their own metabolism, antibiotics act like precision poison.
Precision poison.
They target the specific cellular machinery of the bacteria, perhaps destroying their cell walls or blocking their ability to metabolize sugar. It inhibits their growth or kills them outright without harming your own human cells.
But the sheer effectiveness of antibiotics has led to one of the biggest crises in modern medicine, hasn't it? The overuse of these drugs has created the massive threat of antibiotic resistance. I kind of look at this like weeding a garden.
Okay, how so?
Well, if you have a garden full of weeds and you spray a powerful weed killer, you might kill 99% of them. But let's say a tiny fraction of those weeds happen to have a natural genetic mutation that makes them chemically immune to the spray.
Right, they survive.
Those surviving weeds are the only ones left to drop seeds. So the entire next generation of weeds is made up of the stubborn, resistant ones. By constantly overusing the weed killer, you haven't fixed the problem. You've accidentally bred an unstoppable generation of superweeds.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what you are describing is real-time evolution, and we are driving it. When mutant bacteria survive an antibiotic treatment, they immediately start using binary fission.
And that's fast.
Extremely fast. Because they don't need a host cell, and they split into two identical copies every few minutes, a single resistant survivor can blossom into a population of millions within a single day. Many infectious diseases that were easily cured 50 years ago are now incredibly dangerous again because we've essentially trained the bacteria to survive our best weapons.
That is terrifying. And when we pivot to treating viral infections, the situation changes entirely again. You absolutely cannot use an antibiotic on a virus.
No, it is completely useless.
Right, because a virus doesn't have a cell wall to destroy or a metabolism to poison.
You cannot kill something that isn't alive. Historically, developing treatments for viruses has been incredibly difficult. But we aren't completely defenseless, thankfully. Science has developed antiviral drugs for major infections like HIV.
Okay, so how did those work?
Instead of trying to kill the virus, antivirals act like molecular saboteurs. They might jam the enzymes the virus uses to snip its DNA or block the receptors on the outside of your healthy cells. To go back to your analogy, an antiviral is like shoving a wad of chewing gum into the USB port of your computer, so the malicious flash drive simply cannot plug in.
So what does this all mean? We've talked about the bizarre anatomy of these microscopic agents. We've mapped out the brutal chemical wars happening inside your cells and your bloodstream. But infectious diseases don't stay contained in a single host. Humans interact. We travel.
We do. We're very social.
And this is where the science transitions us from the micro scale to the macro. We move from personal cellular biology to the massive data sets of global epidemiology.
It's exactly. When a disease agent successfully bypasses the immune system of one individual and then transmits to another, maybe through a cough, contaminated water, airborne fungal spores, or a mosquito bite, we move from isolated illness to an outbreak.
An outbreak is defined as a disease occurring in greater numbers than expected in a community or region. It's a noticeable deviation from the normal baseline data.
Right.
But as the spread continues, we start throwing around heavily weighted terms like epidemic and pandemic. I hear these words constantly in the news. Are these just scary buzzwords used by the media, or is there an actual, measurable biological line you cross to get from an outbreak to an epidemic and then to a pandemic?
This raises an important question about how we classify these events. It's not just semantics, it's a very specific classification based on rate and geography.
Okay, break that down for us.
An epidemic refers to a sudden, rapid increase in the number of cases spreading through a specific population or region. It's about a high rate of localized community spread. A pandemic, on the other hand, is an epidemic that has completely broken geographical boundaries, spreading over several countries or continents.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a matter of massive global scale, affecting a significant portion of the worldwide population. Influenza, for example, has reached pandemic levels multiple times in human history, precisely because it crosses oceans so effectively.
And understanding that distinction requires intense data analysis. Epidemiologists aren't just looking at the biology of the pathogen under a microscope anymore, they are tracking the behavior of the human hosts. They map out the community spread, identify the initial clusters of infection, and study the transportation networks that allow a virus to jump from one continent to another.
Because once you hit the scale of an epidemic or pandemic, giving individuals antiviral drugs isn't enough to stop the
You
crisis.
need bigger tools.
Exactly. You have to implement sweeping public health interventions to control the spread at the population level. This is why tactics like quarantine are so incredibly critical.
If a pathogen requires human proximity to jump from host to host, a quarantine artificially severs that bridge. Think of a localized epidemic like a raging forest fire. The pathogen is the fire, and human hosts are the trees.
That's a great visual.
If you quarantine a neighborhood, you are essentially digging a massive trench around the burning trees. You aren't necessarily putting the fire out, but you are starving it of new fuel. Without new hosts to infect, the chain of transmission breaks, and the outbreak just sort of burns itself out.
This highlights why all these different scientific disciplines have to communicate. You cannot effectively dig that trench or manage a pandemic without understanding the microscopic biology of the specific agent causing it.
It all connects back.
It does. You need to know exactly how it transmits to determine your public health strategy. If the data shows the pathogen is a waterborne parasite, a quarantine won't really help. You need to shut down the water supply. If it's an airborne viral spore, you need mass masking and ventilation. The microscopic reality dictates the global response.
We've gone on quite the journey today. We started at the absolute smallest scale imaginable, the chemical geometry of a virus's non-living protein coat, the explosive speed of a dividing bacterium, the dissolving enzymes of a fungus, and the biological thievery of a parasite.
And we followed that thread all the way up to the massive, continent-spanning scale of global pandemics.
We've examined how your body's immune system mounts a brilliant chemical defense, and how human ingenuity has tipped the scales with vaccines and antivirals. But we've also seen how our own behaviors, like the overuse of antibiotics creating unstoppable superbugs, or the speed of global travel turning localized outbreaks into pandemics, are constantly shifting the battlefield.
It's an ongoing war.
It really is. Knowing your enemy, understanding whether you are fighting a virus, a bacterium, a fungus, or a parasite is the ultimate key to knowing how to prevent it, treat it, and stop it from sweeping the globe. It is a playbook for human survival.
Absolutely.
But as we wrap up this deep dive, there is one reality of this microscopic war that I just can't shake. When looking at treatments, the research notes that we still struggle immensely with treating the most common viral infections, particularly the common cold.
It is a relentless, endlessly repeating cycle.
Viruses aren't living things. They are just non-living strings of genetic code wrapped in a protein shell. The reason you can catch a cold year after year isn't because your immune system is weak, it's because there are hundreds of different varieties of cold viruses, and their genetic code is constantly mechanically mutating.
Constantly changing shape.
Right, they change their physical shape just enough to make your immune system's saved keys utterly useless. It makes you wonder, if viruses are just this cold mechanical code endlessly shuffling their own instructions to evade our defenses without any conscious thought, will human science ever truly cure the common cold?
That is the million-dollar question.
Or are we forever locked in an evolutionary stalemate with an enemy that isn't even alive? It's something to think about the next time you are standing in front of your bathroom mirror. It might look quiet, it might look perfectly calm, but just beneath the surface, the sci-fi battle continues. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.